Um, all right, maybe does anyone else want to do a quick intro? If not, we can kick it off. All right, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this instance of the Out of Bounds Office Hours. Pleased to have Michael here with us. Um, Before we get started, just a quick couple housekeeping notes. This talk is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube afterwards. We do have an open source Ask Metaflow channel where if you have further discussions, you can continue in that Slack channel as well. Also, we have a GitHub repository. Please like and subscribe. All right, well, Michael, take it away.
All right, cool. Thanks for having me, Nissan and Savin. So today I'm going to be talking about how we at Netflix have deployed a model training service using Metaflow. Metaflow has been really great for us, especially as an R&D team. So I was happy to share our learnings here. So quick intro, my name is Michael. I'm a machine learning engineer on the studio media algorithms teams. And then our general purpose is to develop machine learning algorithms for studio and VFX applications. And obviously no ML talk is complete without a completely AI generated video, which my director made for our team logo, Hossein. So briefly, what I'm going to be talking about. So one, I'll give you some context about what we're doing and what we've done. I'll talk about why we ended up choosing Metaflow to begin with. I'll talk about how we deploy a PyTorch Lightning training model script using Metaflow. I'll talk about how we use the options that we have in Metaflow to configure the training. I'll talk about how we deploy this training service, and then I'll talk about what wins and lessons we've learned, and then just recap it all at the end. So first, the context on what we're doing. So effectively, what we had prior to us developing this service was that we had researchers who had built these machine learning models, and then we're training on whatever data that they had. We had our end users who wanted to train these models using their own data. And then thirdly, we also had Netflix GPU infrastructure, which provides compute and the access to the GPUs needed to train our models. So effectively, this diagram is what we had before, where our end users, our stakeholders would transfer data to the researchers. Researchers would run these ad hoc GPU workstations, and then those workstations would be running on Netflix's GPU infrastructure. Obviously, this is not a very sustainable training service model, given the intense human-in-the-loop nature of it. So effectively, what we were looking for Metaflow to do was to kind of transform this diagram into this, where our end users and researchers would use Metaflow, and then Netflix, the Metaflow flow would handle putting the training on the Netflix GPU infrastructure itself. And so this really just reduces the amount of human in the loop needed to train an entire model, and so that our Netflix researchers and engineers on the team really just have to maintain this one Metaflow script, and then that makes it accessible by everyone who wants to potentially use and train one of the models that we provide. So let me just talk about why we ended up choosing Metaflow, given other options like rolling our own sort of service using like ECS or something. So one, Metaflow at Netflix comes with very deep Netflix integration. So one is integration with Maestro, which is our workflow orchestrator. It's kind of similar to the I forgot the name of it, but there's also the workflow orchestrator supported by the open source Metaflow, but this is kind of just Netflix's version of it. It also supports Titus, which is our container orchestration service. And so just the combination of these two does really just make it really easy to deploy things at Netflix using Metaflow, which makes it a really attractive option. Also, the whole premise of being able to write once and run anywhere was really attractive. Like if all you had to do was write like a test flow, all you have to do is put a resources decorator onto one of your steps, and then all of a sudden you can run this flow using locally just by doing run, and then you can run it on whatever compute that you want with DecoSpec, and in our case it would be with Titus. And then so this proposition was really attractive because then we don't have to maintain a separate sort of submission script or anything like that for running these training services. I also think Metaflow came with a really attractive deployment story because effectively at the end of the day, while we do want to enable researchers to have this previous sort of write once, run anywhere sort of story, our end users don't have access to this flow or any of the accompanying libraries in source code form, so they can't necessarily run this as is. So the deployment story then for the end users would need to be one without access to our source code and with a completely functional virtual environment. And that's where our deep integration with Metro comes in, where we allow users to trigger workflows with a REST API. This is just copy and paste it from the Metro README. And how Metaflow enables kind of connects all the dots together is that they support PyPy and PyPy base decorators to let us specify requirements.txt file to be able to just populate an environment. Which so given all of these sort of pieces, like it just made Metaflow it was just a really convenient choice for us to be able to deploy this training service. And just to give you some context, like our team is generally mainly researchers. There's a couple engineers, and the engineering team is growing. But for an R&D team, our goal is to have as little overhead as possible, and in allowing the transition from research to like a production engineering service as possible. And I think Metaflow, when we were evaluating it, did seem to present this as an option. I'll also note that the tagging system is pretty convenient. At least at Netflix, we have Metaflow runs and their tags kind of all sunk into a data lake that lets us kind of just attribute our GPU usage spliced by tags, which is really just useful for us, given that we're deploying a training service. And finally, I'll note that the Metaflow UI has provided pretty great observability for us. Just the fact that it's able to, split the tasks on the left-hand side, being able to show us the logs for the task, and then being able to like see the details, which is like the tags and like the input parameters for your flow, as well as the artifacts produced by your flow, as well as being able to have like performance metrics all in one place. This really makes it a really attractive option just for in terms of like basic observability, so long as we can find this flow. So with all that said, I think that's kind of just what makes Metaflow a particularly attractive option for us. So let me just talk about next about what we had before and how we transitioned this previous training setup to Metaflow. So what we had before was a PyTorch Lightning CLI setup. So for those of you who are not familiar with PyTorch Lightning or PyTorch Lightning CLI, you kind of had this setup where you have like a CLI module, you have your model module, and then you have your data module. And then the PyTorch Lightning CLI will automatically take care of reading things from your command line such that it runs the right thing for you. So by right thing, I mean either like your training script or your evaluation script or your validation script. All that gets handled for you from the command line. This was obviously great for researchers. They kind of just handled writing their two modules, the model and the data, and then PyTorch Lightning CLI will handle everything else for them. The problem with this though is that when you do Lightning DDP, what it does is that you start a main process, which is your trainer script, and then PyTorch Lightning will automatically rerun your script once for every GPU on your machine. And then so this works great if you're just running the PyTorch Lightning script. However, if you naively translate this to Metaflow and just kind of do like a pure copy and paste into a step, you run into this situation where your main process is now your flow script, and now PyTorch Lightning is trying to rerun your flow script for every GPU. The interesting thing is that, at least based off my local testing, this did seem to work. but it does feel a little unadvisable, especially given that we ended up avoiding this situation because we had non-repeatable logic in the Metaflow step that we wanted to run in the same step as the training. But so I would say that we generally decided to avoid this and any complications that might arise with it. So what we ended up doing, what we ended up doing was that we just ran a subprocess within our Metaflow step, and it to just call the trainer script. And then so we also decided to switch out Lightning CLI. So initially, well, the initial reason actually as I was writing this talk was that, well, this was our setup, and I was like, oh, we can't necessarily have we can't have Lightning CLI because it reads from the command line, so it won't really play nicely with Metaflow. And then as I was writing this presentation, I realized, well, we could have just called the Lightning CLI script as a subprocess from the Metaflow flow. So that's just a fun little retrospective that I remembered in retrospect. But in any case, we decided to replace Lightning CLI. So we wanted to keep the same configuration file that Lightning CLI provides. So you see on the left that you have a YAML file that specifies what class you want to use for your model, as well as how to initialize it, your data, and your trainer. And then we switched it to use Typer, which is a CLI tool, and then Omega Conf, which is just a way of nicely parsing YAML files. And then we were able to just dynamically load this. It was actually pretty simple to run, to write, but you just have to just, make sure that your researchers are annotating their init function, and then that you can parse out the annotations and just kind of resolve the types properly. And then that just gives you effectively the equivalent functionality to Lightning CLI. And then so as an added benefit, you get to just kind of pierce through a lot of that magic and kind of have more control over that whole process yourself. Another library that's commonly used in machine learning is TQDM. Something simple like this didn't really work in our setup with Metaflow, which was a little surprising. It would show up in the UI logs, but it wouldn't show up if you're running it locally on your machine. And so what we discovered was that it was two things. So one, we had to pipe our standard error to standard out on the Metaflow side. And then there's also this TQDM logging redirect context manager that lets you redirect to a logging logger. And the combination of these two things would help you make sure that TQDM, which is pretty essential for machine learning progress updates, to get shown up into your logs. And finally, I will note that any sort of training service definitely needs a retry, and then so the retry decorator is great. However, the next thing that you have to kind of consider is that usually you don't want to restart the training from scratch usually, especially if you're retrying because of like a or something like that, or like a temporary network failure or anything like that. So Metaflow actually makes it really easy to catch these retries and to be able to automatically do the retries in Metaflow. And two, to also be able to identify when you are doing a retry given the current attempt variable. And then so what we did was we just every training task has a S3 bucket that all the checkpoints get dumped out into. And then for those of you who are not familiar with PyTorch Lightning, they really nicely separate out, or they name the checkpoint files inside that folder really easily for you. So it's just going to be epoch, a number underscore step, and number.ckpt. And then so you just list out the files in the bucket and then just parse out the epoch and the step to find out which is the most recent checkpoint that was made, and then just resume from there. And then so next, I'm going to briefly talk about how we configure our Metaflow flows to be able to provide this service. So obviously the first thing is just your kind of very basic parameter. And then so these are things like that we want users to specify at runtime. Nothing particularly crazy about this. Like for an instance, in this instance, we could have them specify a checkpoint that they want to fine tune from. And then so that gets passed in as a parameter, and that works great. The next thing that was released after our initial evaluation, but has turned out to be extremely helpful for us, is the config option in Metaflow. This lets us send up a deployment time configuration along with our Metaflow flow and kind of just hard code that into the flow, which has been great for specifying things like the resources decorator. Lets us specify exactly what machine we want this training service to run on, and then the user doesn't have to worry about any of that. The last thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to combine these two things, because effectively the config that we've shown before, that Lightning configuration, we wanted to have a very sane default for the users, so that if they train without specifying anything, they get a reasonable model back. But for advanced users, like, they might want to specify parts of that config inside their own configuration, such that they get a better behavior for the particular data set that they're training on. So in this case, what we did was we deployed the default configuration as a Metaflow config, and then we let the user specify an override config as a parameter. And this has turned out to be a very useful sort of pattern for us. So much so that we wanted to make sure that this, like, we do this for this Lightning configuration. We do this for some other IO configurations. We do it for and some other things as well. So how we accomplish this is that we add a class decorator, which actually makes it really easy to kind of to reuse this sort of pattern across all our Metaflow flows, because it's a really helpful pattern. So effectively, what you see here is that we have a basic config that we use, that we parse with Omega Conf, and then the user or the creator of the Metaflow flow was used as parse Lightning config, which does a simple Omega Conf that merge to merge those things, to merge the config with the parameter config. And then it resolves the configuration before returning it back to users. So the magic that happens here is in this add YAML config from parameter or file decorator. And then so effectively what you can imagine is that what we wanted to have, because we want this flow to work for both not only the end user, who are generally calling this via like a REST API, we also wanted this system to work for our users who are running them from the CLI, our researchers. And then so we wanted to give them as many options as possible on how they wanted to specify particular overrides. And then so what Omega Conf supports is reading from a file and reading from dot lists. So we want to support both of those. And then what Metaflow provides is the parameter option as well as the include file option. So we wanted to support those two as well. And so what this add YAML config from parameter or file option does is it adds 4 new attributes onto your class. A parameter that takes in a file name URI, a parameter that takes in the raw string, which is another option, a parameter that takes in the dot list that can be parsed by Omega Conf, and adds an attribute that adds the include file attribute, and as well adds another attribute that just creates a decorator that lets the user be able to just grab the final parameter after merging all of the above into one single config. And this has just been super nice to use, and just generally works with Metaflow. So this has been great. Just the fact that Metaflow allows us to have this much configurability, even with something simple like passing in configurations to the Metaflow service. Next, I'll talk briefly about how we deploy our service. I think deployment is probably one of the things that we think about the most here, especially for an R&D team. We want the deployment to be as seamless as possible, and then generally we don't want researchers to necessarily have to think about how they deploy, aside from git commit and then git push. And that's kind of the extent of it. So I'm going to talk about how we got there with our Metaflow service. So first off, our deployment goals is one, this Metaflow flow needs to run fast locally on developer machines. It needs to be able to run on the GPU infrastructure in 2 ways. One, on an ad hoc basis, which is researchers running on the command line, as well as on the deployed service using Maestro that we talked about. Users should also be able to test using locally edited projects locally and on internal compute infrastructure. So what that means is that users should not have to publish changes to their Python packages to be able to run this training service on our compute, on our cloud, which is pretty essential for this fast iteration time. And finally, the user should need to do as little as possible to do all of the above. So we want something to kind of just abstract all this away from the users such that they don't have to worry about it, especially given that our internal users are generally researchers. So we have a Python monorepo setup which uses UV. So our general directory structure looks like this thing on the left, where we have a projects folder, and inside that projects folder there could be multiple projects. So in this case, for the sake of an example, there's 3 folders: test1, test2, test3. For our project setup, which is on the left, this is a pyproject.toml file. This is for test1 in this case. We're able to specify, what project we are working on, what version it is, as well as the dependencies. And in this case, we specify the dependencies from test1 to test2 and test3. And you also see that these are editable dependencies specified via relative path. So effectively, this is kind of the setup that we have. And then every time a user wants to run something, they just do UV run Python and then run their script from the project folder that they're in. And then locally on any machine, this works fine. And then so this is kind of what it would look like if we were to run locally with UV, with like a Metaflow configuration. So this UV run Python, your flow, making sure that you specify your local environment, pass in any configs that you might want to use, you specify run, any parameters that we want to use, and this just works because the Metaflow flow will obviously pick up your UV virtual environment, and this is actually super fast to run because UV has been really great to work with. Now the complexities get introduced when you start to want to run something like this on not your local machine. You want to run it on internal compute, and then so this is where we go back to where we use PyPy-base. So Metaflow provides the new config stuff, so we're able to parse a requirements file, and then this is able to that requirements.txt file is able to get passed into the PyPy-base, which lets Metaflow create this Python virtual environment on the fly whenever it runs. So this is actually super simple to do. You just do this and you just slightly modify your CLI call to just instead of specifying environment local, you specify environment conda, and then you just pass in your deco spec for running it on the compute that you care about, and boom, Metaflow will generate the virtual environment for you on the fly. And I will note that we did go down this path before Metaflow UV integration was released, so that might change things. But at this point, we have a deployed service, so we're probably not going to switch anytime soon. But that is also a potential option to evaluate as well if you look to do the same thing. So now the complexities come back in is that we have a monorepo. If you forgot about that, so our test flow is in this test1 project. But we also want to be able to specify dependencies to test2 and test3. And then so in this case, a requirements.txt doesn't really work because, well, we would be passing editable dependencies, and that's not really supported. So what you can do in Metaflow is, well, you can generate your requirements.txt, but you can also create symlinks. And then so what Metaflow will do, so these two symlinks are just pointing to the source module within the test2 and test3 projects. And then these symlinks will get pulled into your Metaflow runtime environment as copies. And then Metaflow, when you go to do import test2, it will just work in Metaflow, which is great and super helpful. And then so what we do is that we just generate these symlinks at runtime to avoid polluting our repository. So this is kind of this whole process of creating these symlinks is transparent to our end user researchers. And in this way, this as an added benefit allows us to effectively get the benefit of editable dependencies while running Metaflow on our computer infrastructure on Titus. So users all they have to do is go into test 2 or test 3, modify some files, start up a new test flow run in test 1, and then it'll automatically pick up those changes. And then requirements.txt is only composed of projects that are published either on PyPy or our internal Python artifact repository. And then this is also generated on the fly. And then so we use UV to generate this. So UV export does effectively the job that we needed to do. And the next thing is that, well, this is great, but we also need this to run in CI/CD. So we aren't like trying to like manually do this every time. So we definitely need tooling around all of this to be able to get it to happen. So effectively what the tooling does is that, well, we're going to go into that test 1 project. We're going to create the symlinks that we need. We're going to need to export the requirements.txt and filter it before we pass that requirements.txt to Metaflow. And in our case, we're deploying onto Maestro in CI/CD, so we automatically run the Maestro create with the proper configs attached to it. And then we want to clean up after ourselves and remove the symlinks, remove the requirements.txt file, such that this entire setup is completely transparent to the user. And then so I will note that we do have a custom requirements filter sort of logic in here. And then all it's doing is it's kind of just stripping out all the internal editable dependencies from the requirements.txt file, because UV export will kind of include that, given that in our pyproject.toml file, we are specifying those editable dependencies. And then I will also note that we also do use a different version of Python than what's specified on our default sort of Docker images that gets run for these jobs. So that this requirements.txt file also includes a line that specifies our Python version, and that'll make sure Metaflow runs the right Python version as well. And so all of this gets automated. So we technically aren't running all these command scripts every time a user runs all these things, but it kind of gets the point across. Oh, and then I will note that all of this is automated based off the contents of the pyproject.toml file. And then so all these sort of things combine together to be able to allow us to deploy seamlessly from CI/CD as well as users' local machines for Metaflow. And then so I will note that this hasn't been a super seamless process actually for us. And then so the biggest win for us is obviously our access to GPUs. Researchers don't have to set up ad hoc instances for training, and our end users gain access to high performance GPUs. So everyone kind of wins here, and this is because of Metaflow. Just being able to just present this unified interface to every user who wants to use that training service. And yeah, and like I said, like this placement on the correct compute infrastructure is handled by Metaflow, so it's not something that this team has to worry about, because for now, we're running our general compute infrastructure, and in the future, we might want to run it on our GPU cluster and so on and so forth. This is a big win for us because research is unimpeded. Because effectively, what the researchers can do is that they can continue writing their training code without worrying about the existence of Metaflow, because Metaflow is purely a wrapper around the training script. And then in this case, like the engineers on the team can handle the sort of the Metaflow wrapping of the script, and researchers continue developing as they were before, which is just a win for everyone. We also have significantly reduced our operational burden, given that our R&D team, we don't want to be necessarily on call all the time for our training service. Just the fact that Metaflow has a comprehensive set of integrations that are internal to Netflix has been super helpful for us to compute and to our scheduler. And those two things just take a large load off of the team. And like I said, it is less on-call service for our R&D team, which saves us a lot of headache. I will note that we have, and this is a lesson probably not unfamiliar to everyone in software engineering, but has been particularly poignant for us. We have realized that we need more automated testing of our training service. Because there's now multiple ways where bugs can be found in the Metaflow flow itself, the interface between Metaflow and PyTorch Lightning, as well as in the training code. So obviously, more automated unit integration and regression testing here is needed. And this is actually one of those areas that we're still trying to figure out on how to best accomplish. And so just to recap, so what we have is the service where end users will interface with Maestro. Maestro will take care of interfacing with Titus. Titus will run this Metaflow job, and Metaflow will run our PyTorch Lightning script. This abstraction is not necessarily the most technically accurate, but I think it's sufficient for demonstration purposes. So realistically, what I'm trying to show here is that the outer layers only have to deal with the inner layers, and we have no communication back the other way, which just makes it super easy to develop a really nice service that, effectively anything in the inside doesn't have to worry about all the things around the outside, which makes it super easy to deploy, super easy to develop, and super easy to continue to maintain. And then with that, I will take any questions.
Awesome. Interesting talk, Michael. So I have a bunch of questions. So the first one is about the symlink thing you mentioned. Does your test 2 and test 3 not have any dependencies?
So they do. So what we actually end up doing is that our automated PyProject Tomo based sort of tool will automatically look for every possible editable dependency recursively and symlink them. And then so anything else that's published will get put into the requirements.txt file.
Okay, so you combine the requirements into like
so because when UV resolves your environment, it'll combine all the requirements from every project that you depend on, and then the only thing that you have to take care of with your symlinks is to make sure that you've symlinked all your editable dependencies. And then we use editable dependencies across all our projects, so we just have to recursively find all our editable dependencies and symlink them in.
I see. Okay. Because the PyPy decorator does actually support, you could put in like file : / to the local directory path, and it would package that up and resolve all the dependencies as well. But that's not a very advertised feature.
Oh, well, today I learned, I guess. So initially I just found out that you can do the symlink thing, and it worked well for us. So
okay, that's good to know. And then you mentioned the checkpointing. So we do have an open source checkpointing extension that should make that stuff easier as well.
What's the name of it?
I don't recall. It's having here. I can find it. Oh, it's just like Metaflow - checkpoint.
Okay.
Okay. So then you mentioned the testing story. So we internally have been revamping all our testing as well to use deployer and runner. And by doing so, we could have everything run inside PyTest. So the PyTest just calls either deploy or running depending on what you're trying to test.
Yeah.
And then it just makes it a lot easier to configure everything. You could use standard PyTest features like parameterize, filtering. Yeah, it's pretty nice I can show you the PR later if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think it is something that we're looking to do more of, because it's been such a pain to dig through these failures every once in a while.
By the way, if anybody has questions on the line, you could ping, jump in. For the cost usage, are you tagging each step, like, or is it a flow level?
It is flow level, because our effectively our Metaflow training flow is just a 3-step thing. It's a start, a train, and an end. And then so the train pretty much handles everything. So we just tag it at the flow level.
But all are GPU steps.
No, just the train is the GPU step. Everything else is the CPU step.
Okay.
That really don't do that much. I could probably just merge it all into a start or whatever, but whatever.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And regarding the PyTorch Lightning thing, did you know there's this rank 0 only decorator?
Yeah. So the main problem is that because the initial thing that I tried to do, which really just threw me off of using PyTorch Lightning overall, is just I effectively wrote the PyTorch training inside the Metaflow step, and then so if you did the so you don't really have options of doing rank 0 only at that point because you're within your Metaflow step, and then you don't necessarily. So you kind of want. So what we do for our training is that we kind of right now, at the very least, is download the entire data set onto the machine, and so we only want to do that prior to training. And we can't do that in a separate Metaflow step because it has to run on the same machine when you get to go and compute. And then so we do it within the train step right before we sub-process out to the trainer. So I do know of rank 0 only, but I'm not sure that was particularly solving our requirements here because we also had to, from that data set that we download, generate the PyTorch Lightning configuration to send to PyTorch Lightning. So there's reasons why I couldn't just do like a rank 0 only, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that was most. Oh yeah. So in terms of future things, you mentioned the testing story. Like, what other improvements do you have in mind?
I think that's something we're still figuring out. I mean, I think we definitely want to be able to just somehow figure out a way of testing these services in a way that makes sense. That allows us to catch errors fast, but also be able to do like full-on integration and regression testing, and be able to pull back our deployments to make sure when we do find something that has failed, or like just to prevent that deployment from happening until like that integration test passes further down the line, but also not block our CI/CD Jenkins job from proceeding, because we don't want Jenkins waiting hours for some training test to finish.
Yeah, that makes sense. That even for us, I think the Jenkins team recommended that we don't have long-running jobs on
Yeah.
Jenkins. So we put in Jenkins, we trigger a flow which can then run async and then publish the results later.
And when you say publish the result, I forget. Can we publish to Maestro internally from a Metaflow flow, or does that have to be separate?
What do you mean by publish to Maestro?
Because we do the Maestro create to host, to deploy the service, and then so can that be done from a Metaflow in a flow step, or does it have to be?
Yes, that can be done. Yeah, you do need to have the correct permissions set up using Metatron, I believe.
Yep. Cool.
All right, awesome. Anybody with questions on the line? If not, yeah, thanks a lot, Michael, for the presentation. I'll let you know when the video is available online.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.